Okay, let's say you're standing in the grocery store, right? And there's this guy. And he's loud and opinionated. The type of guy who believes deodorant is optional. And he's arguing with the cashier about how mayonnaise is a part of a secret globalist plot. And you're watching this whole situation and you're thinking, this guy is clearly unwell. Now, imagine half of the people in the store turning to you and saying, hey, don't be judgmental. He's just telling it like it is. And anyway, you can't prove mayonnaise isn't part of a conspiracy. At some point, you realize the problem isn't just the loud guy. The problem is the crowd enabling him. Now, replace mayonnaise conspiracy guy with President Donald Trump, and replace cashier with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and replace the grocery store with the entire country. And here we are. Happy holidays, everyone. Welcome to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I am your host. And today we're going to be talking about the elephant in the room. Well, one of them anyway. Since long before Donald Trump glided down that escalator in 2015 to announce he was running for president, he's had a troubling history of racism. Not always that brash, in-your-face variety, though sometimes it was pretty barefaced, but a type of racism that was a smidge less brazen. Since winning that election the following year, throughout his first term and now into his second, things have not gotten better. The somewhat latest example of this is his rhetoric regarding Ilhan Omar, the U.S. representative from Minnesota specifically, and Somalis in general. In this episode, I want to break down some of the details of his unsavory perspective on this and touch on why in the hell there is anyone who is still willing to insist that he's not racist. But before all of that, let's touch on some hot topics. Now, this first one is a story that I don't feel a lot of people are paying enough attention to, because while everyone is watching the daily chaos, the press conferences and the tantrums and the indictments and the investigations and finger pointing and the will he, won't he news cycle that surrounds President Trump, something else has been happening a bit more quietly. And by that I mean deliberately quietly. A pro-Trump political group, one you probably have never heard of unless you read all the way to the bottom of the political news articles like it's the ingredients on a cereal box. Anyway, this group has been spending millions on shaping congressional maps for 2028. Not 2026, not the upcoming midterms, no, 4 years from now. And this isn't happening in one state or two. It's a coordinated national strategy to reshape the House of Representatives in a way that gives Republicans a structural advantage for a decade or more. So let's break it down, because this is important. This is the kind of political maneuvering that doesn't trend on social media, but absolutely determines who controls Congress. Multiple outlets reported that a pro-Trump PAC aligned closely with his political orbit, donors and operatives, is funneling millions into state-level Republican efforts to redraw congressional maps for 2028. Not for fair maps, not for competitive maps, not for let the voters choose the politicians. No. This is about ensuring the politicians choose the voters. According to reporting, the PAC is funding state GOP legislative campaigns, legal teams in key battleground states, data modeling efforts to identify the most favorable district shapes, policy groups pushing for aggressive redistricting reforms, and by reforms they mean give us more power to draw squiggly lines. These maps will determine all 435 House seats, and this PAC, this Trump-allied operation, is essentially treating the process like it's the Super Bowl of political power. And here's the kicker. The news reports noted that they're doing this instead of investing heavily in the 2026 midterms. Because why fight over the battlefield today when you can design the battlefield for tomorrow? Millions of dollars, quietly, strategically, systematically. Because if you can't win the game outright, you can rewrite the rule book. Now, for those who aren't quite sure, let's take a second to explain what a PAC is, because people hear the term constantly on the news, and it's become one of those pieces of political jargon that everyone sort of nods along like they understand it. PAC stands for Political Action Committee. It's basically a vehicle for money. Money that supports candidates, funds political messages, pays for ads, bankrolls issue-focused campaigns, and sometimes, yes, buys a few nice steak dinners for influential people in dimly lit restaurants. Now, there are different types. Traditional PACs have contribution limits and set rules. Super PACs can take unlimited money from rich people, corporations, and anyone with a spare $20 million lying around. Dark money groups hide their donors entirely behind legal shells. And some PACs, like the one we're talking about today, are political weapons dressed up as nonprofits. But the point is, PACs matter because they amplify influence. One person with $2 billion in the bank still only gets one vote, but they can spend virtually unlimited cash to influence millions of votes. And in America, influence is often more powerful than any one ballot. PACs don't just fund campaigns, they shape the entire political landscape. Policy ideas, media narratives, voter outreach, legal strategies, legislative priorities, the rise and fall of individual politicians. They are, for lack of a better phrase, the political industrial complex. Now, you can't talk about PACs without talking about Citizens United versus FEC. In 2010, the Supreme Court made a decision that basically turned American elections into a spending contest. Citizens United declared that political spending is free speech. Yes, money equals speech now. If you've got more money, apparently you've just got some more speech. The ruling opened the floodgates. Unlimited corporate spending, unlimited spending from wealthy individuals, unlimited independent expenditures, unlimited PAC and super PAC activity, and virtually no transparency requirements. It was like handing a billionaire a megaphone the size of a skyscraper while the rest of us get a kazoo. Before Citizens United, campaigns still had big donors, sure, but there were guardrails. After Citizens United, the guardrails aren't gone. They're in a museum somewhere next to the telegraph machine. Citizens United didn't just change American politics, it reshaped it. The richest Americans became political kingmakers. Corporations gained enormous influence. Special interest groups started writing legislation that lawmakers happily co-signed. And now, thanks to that ruling, one pro-Trump PAC can pour millions into reshaping congressional maps in states where its donors don't even live. This isn't democracy, it's a political investment portfolio. So, why are they doing this? Why spend millions now on something that won't be finalized for 4 more years? Because redistricting isn't about winning one election. It's about locking in power for an entire decade. Congressional maps drawn in 2028 will be in effect from 2030 through 2040. That's 5 House election cycles, 5 chances to lock in structural advantages. The PAC's strategy is simple. 1, win state legislatures that control redistricting, since states hold that pen. Number 2, bolster GOP legal teams so they can defend aggressive maps in court. Number 3, deploy data modeling and, quote, community identity arguments, which is a polite way of saying we drew this district to look like a snake because the math worked out. Number 4, ensure maps maximize Republican seats even in swing states, because 51% of the vote magically turns into 70% of the seats. Create maps that neutralize Democrat-leaning voters, particularly urban voters, young voters, and voters of color. This is a long-term strategy, not a short-term campaign. They're building the political architecture of power for the future. And they understand something Democrats have historically been a bit slower to grasp. Control the map and control the House. Control the House, control the legislative agenda. Control the agenda, control the country. It's really that simple. Now, let's talk about why this amounts to dirty pool, because the phrase is right on. It's not illegal, but it sure as hell feels like cheating. Gerrymandering allows politicians to choose their voters instead of voters choosing them. This is the opposite of representative democracy. This is the I pick you version of elections, like a wildly dysfunctional game of political Pokemon. Neutralize opposition votes. Imagine 200,000 Democrats and 200,000 Republicans live in a state. A fair map gives each side a chance at representation. A gerrymandered map says, let's break up the Democrats into 5 districts so the Republicans can win all of them. Everyone votes, but one side wins anyway. Fortify extremist candidates. If a lawmaker knows they're in a safe district shaped like an octopus, they don't need to appeal to moderates. They only need to appeal to the most loyal, most extreme part of their base. And that's how government stops functioning. Undermine the principle of equal representation. 2 voters in the same state can have vastly different political power. Some districts pack people into them like a clown car. Others are designed so sparsely you think you're representing tumbleweeds. Destroy public trust in elections. And rightfully so, because if your vote can be sliced and diced and diluted or cordoned off like a political charcuterie board, what are we even doing? Gerrymandering is legal. It's just not fair. And when done aggressively, like the kind this PAC is paying for, it's an assault on the idea of democracy itself. Now, this is the quiet part you're not supposed to notice. Trump's political operation is very good at distraction. They thrive on chaos, the spotlight, the outrage of the day. But the real work, the real power building happens in the quiet rooms, in the PAC budgets, in the redistricting committees, in the state legislatures, in the court filings, in the data modeling software. This story matters because it's about shaping the next decade of American politics. Most people will never know what's happening. Most voters aren't watching. Most voters don't know what their district includes. And this is exactly why they're doing it. Because the most effective political moves are the ones nobody sees until after they're done. and often when it's too late to reverse them. If we want fair elections, competitive districts, and a government that actually reflects the will of the people as a whole, gerrymandering has to be confronted head on. And the first step is paying attention to stories like this one. Because if we ignore it, they won't just win elections, they'll engineer them. So I'm guessing you saw, if you watched any news or read any news this past week, that there's finally been an arrest in the case of the January 6th pipe bomber. And now that a real human being has been arrested and charged, the narrative finally has some edges. It's no longer a mystery figure in a hoodie. It's a man with a name, a face, and most importantly, as it turns out, a worldview. And that worldview is exactly what some of us knew it was going to be all along. The suspect, according to prosecutors, has now admitted that he was a devoted Trump supporter who genuinely believed the 2020 election had been stolen. The person arrested is Brian Cole Jr., a 30-year-old resident of Woodbridge, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. He didn't just dabble in conspiracy theories. He marinated in them. He basted himself in them. He slow roasted in the crock pot of Stop the Steal Facebook groups until his brain came out fork tender, apparently. He bought the whole package: the ballot stuffing, the hacked machines, the dead people voting, the suitcases of ballots under the table video that turned out to be election workers doing their jobs. He believed the entire fairy tale, and he believed it so deeply that he allegedly built bombs, actual bombs, in the service of that lie. That's where we begin. Because for years, people have been debating whether the disinformation pushed by Donald Trump and his ecosystem was just irresponsible talk, or whether it actually radicalized people. And now, with this arrest, we have the clearest real-world example yet. It radicalized someone to the point of attempted terrorism. Incited violence is no longer an abstract phrase you see in an indictment. It's a pipe bomb left outside a political headquarters. So you would think that the Trump administration would have something to say about the fact that this suspect was motivated by Trump's own false claims. You'd think they might address that, maybe reassure the public, maybe distinguish themselves from the act. Instead, we get three familiar moves: pretend, deflect, and reverse blame. The pretend is, we don't know the motives. The deflect is, the real story is how long it took the FBI to act. And the reverse blame is, this is evidence of government failure, not evidence of Trump-aligned extremism. Okay. Notice what's missing from that list? Any acknowledgement whatsoever that the core belief driving this suspect, the election lie, came from one source and one source only. It's as if someone burned down their house because they believed their toaster was possessed, and the manufacturer's response was, well, the real problem here is the firefighters not showing up sooner. That's the Trump strategy. Do not address the lie. The lie is sacred. The lie must never be questioned. Because the lie is the foundation of everything: grievance, loyalty, power. If you admit the lie contributed to political violence, even a little bit, the whole project starts to wobble. So instead, they pretend the motive is unknown, or exaggerated, or maybe even manipulated by investigators, which is remarkable considering the guy reportedly admitted it outright. In the Trump universe, even a recorded confession is heavily edited or taken out of context, or, my personal favorite, fake news planted by the deep state. But here's the part that really requires our attention. Within minutes of the arrest, Trump-aligned media figures started framing the story as a vindication of Trump rather than a condemnation. See, they said, he acted alone. He wasn't part of the crowd. Therefore, Trump had nothing to do with it. That's like arguing that the arsonist who burned your garage doesn't count because he didn't also steal the lawnmower. This ability to reverse the polarity of reality in real time is part of why the lie persists. No matter what happens, the lie is insulated. When Trump supporters commit violence because they believe Trump's lies, that's not evidence the lie is dangerous. That's somehow more evidence the lie must be true. And so this arrest becomes magically more evidence of election fraud, more evidence of political persecution, more evidence of Trump's righteousness. You could hand these people a meteorite with 2020 was legit carved into the side, and they'd accuse NASA of deep faking geology. But let's zoom out a bit for a second. For years, national security experts, sociologists, and extremism researchers have been warning that political disinformation radicalizes people. And they've been told over and over that they're being hysterical. I'm talking about the experts have been told this. But this case is an example of exactly the kind of radicalization that the experts were talking about. This suspect didn't act because he had a history of extremism. He wasn't an anarchist. He wasn't a known radical before this event. He didn't belong to an organized terror cell. He wasn't a militia guy. He wasn't a foreign agent. He was a Trump supporter who believed the election lie so strongly that he decided he had to do something about it. He believed the country had been stolen. He believed democracy had been overthrown. He believed the future was at stake. And when you believe all that, violence becomes so much easier to justify. This is why the election lie is not simply politics as usual. When you convince millions of people that democracy has been taken from them, you create a moral permission structure for political violence. That's exactly why authoritarian leaders love the "we were robbed" storyline. It gives their supporters an excuse to fight back. And now, here's the part that should chill every prosecutor involved in this case. Trump's blanket, overly broad January 6 pardons could directly screw up the prosecution of this suspect. And no, that is not hyperbole. Trump has issued sweeping pardons to all nonviolent offenders involved in January 6th. That includes a lot of people who provided support, surveillance, coordination, or logistical help, but didn't physically assault anyone. The problem? The definition of nonviolent is vague, painfully vague, dangerously vague. And the suspect in the pipe bomb case, depending on when prosecutors say the offense conduct began and what actions are legally interpreted as part of the January 6th event, could expose the case to legal challenges arguing that some aspects of his conduct fall under that pardon. Now, prosecutors will, of course, argue that building and planting bombs is inherently violent, inherently dangerous, and absolutely not covered. And I think they're right. But defense attorneys love ambiguity the way raccoons love open dumpsters. Was the suspect violent if the bombs didn't detonate? Was the conspiracy itself violent if the devices never exploded? Was the act of placing the bombs considered part of January 6th or a separate crime entirely? Did the pardon's date range and language inadvertently create cover for people whose preparatory actions happened the night before? These aren't far-fetched questions. These are the kinds of arguments defense counsels make as a matter of routine. And this is where the political narrative comes full circle. Trump is publicly outraged about the pipe bomber because it's useful political theater. But Trump's own pardons could make prosecuting the man much harder. Imagine setting your kitchen on fire and then yelling at the firefighters for not getting there fast enough while you're holding a flamethrower. And let's be really honest about this next part. Trump does not want this trial to be a high-profile reminder that his lies motivated an attempted bombing. He does not want television to show testimony from investigators describing the suspect's devotion to him. He does not want prosecutors introducing screenshots of pro-Trump forums where conspiracy theories were passed around like church potluck casseroles. He does not want America watching a jury hear how political disinformation radicalized this guy, because that spotlights the thing Trump fears most. The idea that he is responsible for the consequences of his own rhetoric. And so Trump's message is already trying to influence public perception. They focus on FBI delays, not the motive. They focus on Democrat incompetence, not the election lie. They focus on political weaponization, not extremism. Focus on the deep state, not the suspect's own confession. It's the same trick he's used for years. Make the audience forget the original problem by whipping up anger about something adjacent. Now, the arrest of this suspect is more than a legal story. It's a narrative reckoning. It's a real-world example of what happens when lies metastasize into political action. And it raises the most important question of all. If the former president can radicalize a supporter into building bombs and then issue pardons that could complicate prosecuting that person, what does accountability look like in this country? We are now in a moment where the political leader whose lies helped inspire the crime also controls the messaging, influences the narrative, and has already deployed legal instruments that could undermine the prosecution. So here's the reality that you're not going to hear on cable news. This case is a stress test, not only of the criminal justice system, but of whether the country can still agree that political violence motivated by lies is unacceptable. Because Trump's reaction has shown us that even attempted bombings will be reframed, repurposed, and recycled as political ammunition. Nothing is too dangerous to be spun. Nothing is too serious to become just another piece of propaganda. And that tells us something uncomfortable. The election lie isn't going away. The radicalization isn't slowing down. And the consequences are not hypothetical anymore. We now have a suspect in custody. We have a confession about motive. We have the clearest line yet between Trump's disinformation and real-world violence. And we have a former president whose blanket pardons could accidentally or intentionally muck up the prosecution. This is the story. Not the delays, not the bureaucracy, certainly not the deep state. A man built bombs because he believed the president. And now the president is pretending that belief doesn't matter, while taking political credit for the arrest, dodging responsibility for the motive, and creating legal and rhetorical chaos around the entire case. And that's where we are. A country struggling not just with political division, but with the fallout of a lie that just refuses to die. So let's talk about the Supreme Court case that's about to test whether the Constitution still means what it says, particularly the part that says if you're born here, you're a citizen. Yes, that thing. The one most people thought was settled, the one you had to memorize in 8th grade civics, the one printed right there in the 14th Amendment, no asterisks, no fine print, no, unless the president tweets otherwise. I covered this topic in a previous episode, but now that it's actually going before SCOTUS, it's time to revisit it. So we'll start with the rundown of the executive order at the center of this entire mess. Shortly after retaking office, Trump issued an executive order declaring that children born in the United States to undocumented parents would no longer be considered U.S. citizens at birth. In plain English, he tried to cancel birthright citizenship by executive decree, something no president in American history has ever attempted. The EO essentially reinterprets the 14th Amendment citizenship clause, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens, end quote. To mean, well, not all persons, only the ones we like. It claims that the children of undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore don't qualify. Which is interesting because these same families sure seem to be subject to our laws when the government wants to arrest them, deport them, or prosecute them, or deny them from public benefits. Amazing how jurisdiction shows up when it's convenient. Now, presidents can do a lot of things by executive order. Move funding around, prioritize enforcement, direct agencies, but they cannot amend the Constitution. Let me say that again. They cannot amend the Constitution. If they could, we wouldn't even need Congress. Hell, we wouldn't need elections, just a president with good penmanship. Yet, Trump signed this thing anyway, knowing it was unconstitutional, knowing it would go straight to court, and, let's be honest, knowing the political theater was part of the point. But now the case is in the hands of the Supreme Court, and that, unfortunately, is where the real danger lies. Birthright citizenship is not ambiguous. It's one of the clearest clauses in the entire Constitution. So let's talk about the 14th Amendment, because this isn't murky. It's not one of those constitutional questions that requires 40 pages of legal analysis and, a glass of scotch. Birthright citizenship was written in 1868 specifically to make citizenship equal and unambiguous. It was designed to stop slaveholding states from playing games, declaring some people citizens and others not, based on race and parentage or political convenience. It's literally the amendment that undid the Dred Scott decision, which said black people could never be citizens. The authors wrote it broadly on purpose. If you're born here, you're in. And the Supreme Court reaffirmed this again in 1898 in the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, ruling that U.S.-born child of Chinese immigrants was unquestionably a citizen, despite his parents being legally barred from naturalization at the time. The court made it crystal clear: citizenship at birth does not depend on your parents' status. And there goes 100% of Trump's theory. The idea that subject to jurisdiction excludes undocumented immigrants, it's nonsense. The phrase has always meant, are you under U.S. law? Can you be arrested? Can you be tried? If so, you're under our jurisdiction. There's only one group explicitly excluded: children of foreign diplomats. Why? Because diplomats aren't under U.S. jurisdiction. They have immunity. They can't be arrested. They can't be prosecuted. So unless every undocumented mother in America secretly works for the French embassy in her spare time, I think we're covered. Birthright citizenship isn't just a legal technicality. It's a foundational part of the American identity. Historically, after the Civil War, the country had to decide who got to be an American. Half the nation wanted to maintain a racial hierarchy. The 14th Amendment said, no, you can't do that anymore. Citizenship is defined by where you're born, not how you look or who your parents were. It closed the door on caste systems. It said we are not a nation of inherited privilege or inherited exclusion. To undo it now, that's not tightening immigration. That's resurrecting the logic of the Dred Scott case. From a moral perspective, a child born in the United States didn't choose their parents' immigration status. Punishing them for it is collective punishment, something civilized nations are supposed to avoid. If you're born in Kansas, you're American. That's how it works. End of sentence. And there's a practical reason why this executive order is full nuts. If the EO were allowed to stand, we'd be creating a permanent underclass of U.S.-born children who lack citizenship anywhere. Stateless people living in the only country they've ever known, but without rights, without recognition, and without any path to belonging anywhere. You want instability? That's how you get instability. You want to create a population that can be exploited, disenfranchised, and marginalized? That's how you do it. The founders weren't perfect, but they understood one thing. You build a stable nation by giving people a stake in it. Trump wants to pull up the ladder and then burn it. Now, we have to talk about the elephant in the courtroom. The U.S. Supreme Court itself, a deeply conservative court with the majority handpicked by Trump, is about to decide whether Trump's executive order stands. A lot of people are worried, and not without reason. This court has shown real willingness to reinterpret, stretch, or outright disregard long-standing precedents when it suits their ideological project. But overturning birthright citizenship isn't just a bold move. It's not even a radical decision. It's a legal Chernobyl. It goes against the text of the Constitution, the intent of the framers of the 14th Amendment, 150 years of judicial precedent, every immigration policy since Reconstruction, and the court's own ruling in that past case that I mentioned. To uphold Trump's EO, the court would have to shred the citizenship clause, reject its own case law, and basically say, maybe we don't need the 14th Amendment after all. But here's the thing, even this Supreme Court likes to preserve the appearance of legitimacy. If they throw out birthright citizenship, they're pulling a thread that could unravel the entire constitutional fabric. Because once you say, okay, sure, the president can override the Constitution with an executive order, what's next? Can a president suspend the First Amendment? Can a president declare that some people no longer have Second Amendment rights? Can a president nullify due process? Can a president redefine who counts as a citizen? Can a president decide which constitutional rights only apply to this group and not that group? If this court allows Trump's executive order to stand, they're essentially saying the Constitution is optional, and rights are granted by whoever happens to be in power, not by the document that's supposed to limit that very power. And that should terrify conservatives as much as liberals, because one day their guy won't be in charge. This case isn't just about immigration. It's about whether the Constitution still means what it says, or whether it now means whatever a president wants it to mean. This case may very well be the final litmus test for the current Supreme Court. For years, people on the right have insisted the court is simply returning to constitutional principles and respecting original intent. Well, here's your original intent. The 14th Amendment was written to guarantee birthright citizenship. If the court disregards that, if they allow the president to change the definition of citizenship without a constitutional amendment, then they're not originalists. They're not textualists. They're partisans in robes. And the damage won't stop with immigration, because once you rewrite one constitutional guarantee by executive fiat, you've established a precedent that any right can be rewritten by any president. A future president could strip gun rights. A future president could revoke free speech protections for political opponents. A future president could reinterpret equal protection to exclude certain groups. He could redefine voting rights, redistrict marriage rights, expand or contract religious freedom, nullify reproductive rights, or invent whole new rights out of thin air. Folks, this is not a slippery slope. This is a cliff. If the court signs off on Trump's EO, they're saying the Constitution is no longer the highest law of the land, executive authority is. And once you cross that line, you don't get to walk it back. Birthright citizenship has always been one of the clearest, most egalitarian, most stabilizing principles in American law. It tells the world that America is not defined by bloodlines, that we don't have castes, that you don't inherit your status, that every person born here gets the same starting point. That's supposed to be the nexus of the American dream. Am I wrong? Trump wants to erase that. Not because it's good policy, not because it solves anything, but because it appeals to a worldview that says American identity is something to hoard, something fragile, something threatened by brown babies born in the wrong zip code. And now the question is whether the Supreme Court will hold the line, or whether they'll open the door to a world where constitutional rights are just political bargains waiting to be rewritten. Birthright citizenship isn't just a policy, it's a promise. And we're about to find out whether that promise still holds. All right, so for this week's main topic, I want to talk about Donald Trump's rhetoric about Ilhan Omar and about Somali refugees more broadly, because this isn't just a series of isolated insults. It's not even a pattern. It's a worldview. A worldview with about as much subtlety as a cinder block through a window. And yet millions of Americans insist they don't see it. I don't think he's racist, they say, while Trump is on stage yelling, "Why don't they go back where they came from?" You know, the kind of phrase that always sounds like it should end with someone waving a torch and wearing khaki shorts. The denial is the story. But before we get to that, we need to talk about three pieces. What Trump actually has said about Ilhan Omar, what he said about Somali immigrants, and what her actual record and qualifications are versus the cartoon villain version that Trump sells his followers. So let's start with the greatest hits. If we categorize every Trump insult directed at Representative Omar, we'd be here for 4 hours and we'd need a corkboard, a string, and a bottle of bourbon. But we can focus on the big ones, the ones that built the mythology. Send her back. Probably the most infamous. In 2019, Trump tweeted that Ilhan Omar, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib, should go back where they came from. 3 of those 4 women were born in America. Omar, of course, is a naturalized citizen from Somalia. Trump knew all that. His audience knew all that. And the point was never accuracy. The point was, you're not one of us. At a rally in North Carolina, Trump attacks Omar, and the crowd chants, "Send her back, send her back." Trump stands there, and he watches, and he lets it build, and he basks in it with that grin. Later, he pretends he tried to stop it. Sure. And I tried to stop myself from eating an entire frozen pizza the other night. When Trump starts ranting about sending naturalized citizens back to where they came from, he's not just being offensive. He's bulldozing one of the core pillars of what America claims to be. The entire point of naturalization is that it means something. That once you take the oath, once you pass the tests, once you meet the requirements, you're as American as anyone whose family has been here for 10 generations. That's the deal. That's the promise. If you can rip citizenship away from political rivals or from people whose ethnicity you don't happen to like, then the whole naturalization process becomes a ceremonial joke. It says America is no longer a nation built on ideals, but one built on bloodlines and political obedience. And if that's the new rule, then we should at least be honest enough to admit we've abandoned the principles that we brag about on the 4th of July. Then there's this conspiracy theory that he mentioned just recently, again, that she married her brother. Now, let's start crystal clear right up front. There is zero evidence that Ilhan Omar ever married a family member. None. Zip. The conspiracy was fabricated by right-wing bloggers and amplified by bad faith political actors. Why? Because it checks every racist box on the bingo card. She's black, she's Muslim, she's an immigrant, she wears a hijab, and she challenges white conservative power structures. So what did Trump do? He repeated it over and over and over. Not as a question, not with nuance, not with caution, but as a direct accusation. She married her brother. She committed immigration fraud. She is a criminal. You know, all the statements he never bothers to back with evidence because the accusation itself is the point. The accusation itself is the weapon. It's meant to stain, to dehumanize, to other the person. To Trump, Ilhan Omar isn't a congresswoman. She's a prop, a target, a convenient brown woman to hold up whenever he needs to energize the America First crowd. He doesn't care how many threats she gets because of it. He doesn't care that she's had credible death threats. He doesn't care that she's had to increase her security. He only cares that it works on a rally stage for his base. He said she hates America. This one is practically a catchphrase in Trump world. She hates America. She wants to destroy our country. If you don't like it, here, leave. You know who actually says that? People who desperately want to preserve a version of America that existed before black and brown people had full citizenship. It's coded language. It's not particularly subtle. It's not particularly clever. Just coded enough that his supporters can pretend it's not racist. Now, let's talk a little bit about Representative Omar's actual resume, the one Trump never mentions because it ruins the narrative. Ilhan Omar came to the U.S. as a refugee from the Somali Civil War. She lived in a Kenyan refugee camp for 4 years. She arrived in the United States as a teenager. She learned English by watching American television. Not exactly the biography of somebody who hates America. As far as her education is concerned, she has a bachelor's degree in political science and international studies. She worked as an educator. She worked as a policy fellow. She served as director of policy initiatives at the Women Organizing Women Network. This is someone who has a specialized background in public policy, community organizing, and international relations. That's usually considered, qualified. And let's be honest, that list makes her much more qualified than what Donald Trump was when he ran for president. Now, as far as her political career, she was elected to the House of Representatives in Minnesota, the State House. She passed legislation on education access, health, and civil rights. Then she was elected to the U.S. Congress in 2018. She serves on committees dealing with foreign affairs and budget issues. Advocates for affordable housing, fair immigration policy, workers' rights, and international human rights. Trump paints her as some extremist, an anarchist trying to burn the country down, when her voting record is consistently about expanding civil liberties and improving social services. You know, the opposite of chaos. If she were a white Christian with the exact same resume, Trump would call her a rising star, and the GOP would mail her fundraising checks like she was the Publishers Clearinghouse. Now let's widen the scope a little bit, because this isn't just Representative Omar. Trump has repeatedly used Somali immigrants as a political punching bag. His language usually follows 3 beats. 1, they're criminals. 2, they're dangerous. 3, they shouldn't be here. He said things like, Somalis are taking over Minnesota. They're bringing terrorism. They're not integrating. We need to keep them out of our country. No data. There's seldom any of that. No nuance, just sweeping inflammatory statements. Kind of like yelling shark at the beach, or I guess in this case, it would be more accurate to say yelling it at the swimming pool. In reality, Somali Americans in Minnesota are business owners, teachers, nurses, students, community leaders, other types of professionals. There are thriving Somali neighborhoods, Somali restaurants, Somali cultural centers, and Somali-led civic organizations. They are part of the fabric of Minnesota, not a threat to it. But Trump doesn't care about the facts. He cares about the feelings that he can generate. Fear is politically profitable, and nothing fires up his base like dangerous brown immigrants. Now, this isn't isolated. It fits a pattern, a very, very long pattern. Now, again, the list is far too long to cover in total, but let's rattle off the highlights like we're reading the world's worst best of album. 1. Calling Mexican immigrants rapists. He launched his 2016 campaign with that one. Imagine applying for a job by insulting 40 million Americans. The Muslim ban, a policy literally designed to bar people from entering the U.S. based on their religion and national origin. His shithole countries comment. Remember that one? Talking about African nations and Haiti. He didn't say under-resourced countries. He didn't say countries facing instability. Nope. Straight for the toilet. Then there was the time he attacked a Mexican judge who was actually born in Indiana. But sure, that's not racist. And then we can't forget the Central Park Five. They were exonerated. DNA cleared them. The state paid them a settlement, and Trump still said they were guilty because acknowledging their innocence would mean admitting his racism was wrong. Can't have that. There was the very fine people on both sides talking about a white supremacist rally where someone was murdered. Trump responds with the kind of moral clarity you'd expect from a blender, telling 4 American congresswomen of color to go back, including Omar. This is a pattern. It's not occasional. It's not accidental. It's the brand. Now, this is the part that fascinates me. Not the racism itself. We know what that looks like. It's the denial of it. The refusal to acknowledge the obvious. Why are there still so many people who insist he doesn't have a racist bone in his body? Why? Because, first of all, admitting racism means admitting they supported it. If you say Trump is a racist and you voted for him, guess what that makes you look like? People don't like seeing themselves through that mirror, so they break the mirror. They claim he says what others won't. This is the politically polite way of saying, I like when he's offensive, but I don't want to say it out loud. They redefine racism into oblivion. For some people, unless Trump is physically burning a cross while singing show tunes, they will insist he's not racist. He gives them permission. Trump normalizes prejudices. He makes them feel righteous about them. He puts a presidential seal on their already existing resentments. They like the policies, so they excuse the rhetoric. If cruelty gets me what I want, then it's not cruelty, it's strategy. This is how democracies slide, one permission slip at a time. The denial doesn't just protect Trump, it harms real people. Representative Omar gets threats. Somali communities get targeted. Muslim Americans get painted as automatically suspicious. Black immigrants get vilified. Multiracial America begins to fray. And the country becomes a little less safe, a little less welcoming, a little less united every time political leaders use whole communities as punching bags. Racism in politics isn't just ugly rhetoric. It's a signal. It's a green light. It's permission. When Trump targets Ilhan Omar, he isn't speaking to her. He's speaking to the people who already dislike her. He's validating them. He's telling them they're right. That's how bigotry spreads. Not as wildfire, but as a chain reaction. Ilhan Omar is not a perfect person. Nobody in Congress is perfect. But disagreement isn't what's happening here. She's targeted because she represents blackness, Islam, immigration, womanhood, political power, and the idea of America expanding to include voices that it never included before. Trump attacks the people he fears, and he fears the future, because the future doesn't look like him, and it doesn't look like the crowd chanting, "Send her back." And that's why he doubles down, and why they double down with him, and why so many pretend not to see the obvious. But we're going to call it what it is. We have to, because the stakes are too high for polite euphemisms or different opinions. This isn't an opinion. It's a pattern. It's documented, it's recorded, it's repeated, it's deliberate, and it's racist. Full stop. And until we stop pretending otherwise, the people caught in the crosshairs, Ilhan Omar, Somali immigrants, Muslim Americans, communities of color, they will keep paying the price for someone else's denial. And now for this week's high note. I'm constantly bumping into things on social media that portray some fringe conspiracy theory as being real based solely on a YouTube video or a blog post. It's more frustrating when it flies in the face of established, peer-reviewed science. So this week's high note has two things I really love: the defense of science, and a story where good guys actually show up. A story where ordinary, not usually political people, students, researchers, young scientists, decide they've had enough of being told what they're allowed to say, study, or believe. A story where conscience meets courage and courage meets community. I'm talking about the growing grassroots movement called Stand Up for Science. This isn't some slick political organization with consultants and strategists and a logo that looks like it was designed by Apple. These are grad students, postdocs, lab assistants, people who own one nice pair of shoes and several sweatshirts with coffee stains. People who spend most of their days in basements, pipetting things into other things and hoping their funding doesn't get cut. Which, ironically, is exactly the population that authoritarian-leaning politicians think won't fight back. Turns out they will. Because when the administration began imposing new restrictions on scientific language and inquiry, banning or penalizing the use of terms like equity, inclusion, structural bias, and even climate justice, something snapped. Not in a chaotic, destructive way, but in a clear, principled, absolutely American way. In a this is wrong and we're not going to pretend it's normal kind of way. And so they organized. Not with a big budget, not with a flashy national campaign, but with group texts, shared Google Docs, late-night planning sessions in dorm lounges, and the stubborn belief that truth still matters. They call themselves Stand Up for Science because that's exactly what they were doing, standing up for the idea that research should serve truth, not ideology. Their first actions were small but symbolic. A teach-in on academic freedom held on a campus quad, then a petition, then a rally outside a state house that completely befuddled lawmakers who had no idea grad students even had free time. Then came the media interviews, the op-eds, and the quiet, relentless pressure on universities not to comply with political demands to censor academic language. But the most beautiful thing, the real heart of the story, is that none of these young scientists thought of themselves as activists. They were just people who loved the work they were doing. People who believe that studying society honestly requires being able to describe society honestly. People who saw the pattern, the way every attack on science, every push to silence certain words, every attempt to turn research into a political loyalty test leads somewhere dangerous. And they refused to play along. They stood up not only for themselves, but for every student who will walk into a lab or a classroom after them. They stood up for evidence-based scholarship, for academic freedom, for the idea that science belongs to the public, not to politicians who happen to be in power this year. The thing is, censorship doesn't show up all at once. It creeps. It starts with a list of forbidden words, then maybe a restriction on grant language, then guidance that tells researchers which topics are appropriate for public discussion. One by one, people look around and start asking themselves, is this a hill worth dying on? But these young scientists looked at that hill and said, actually, yes, this is the one. Because when you're a researcher, your entire life is built on asking questions. Taking that away is like telling a pianist that they can only use the white keys. You can still technically produce sound, but the music is dead. What feels so good, so genuinely uplifting, is watching them build something together, not just a protest movement, a community, a network of people who show up for one another, who mentor each other, who check in when someone speaks at a rally or publishes a piece and suddenly finds themselves bombarded with online abuse. A community where students teach each other not just molecular biology or statistical modeling, but how to navigate political intimidation with clarity and courage. It's easy to feel cynical about activism sometimes. So many movements are treated like a branding opportunity. But Stand Up for Science is different because it didn't start with an identity. It started with a line being crossed. A very human line. The line between, I can keep my head down, or I can't look at myself in the mirror if I do. And that's why this story matters nationally. Because science as an institution relies on public trust. And when politicians bully researchers into science, they're not just targeting classrooms or labs, they're targeting the public's access to truth. These young scientists saw that. They understood that the front lines of democracy don't always look like what you'd expect. Sometimes they look like a bunch of 23-year-olds in lab coats passing around homemade protest signs that say things like, data has no party, and let us use our words. These actions are already having ripple effects. Universities are pushing back more publicly against politically motivated research restrictions. Some state legislatures have backed off proposed bans after seeing backlash. And perhaps most importantly, students on other campuses are getting inspired to organize their own chapters. There's something profoundly American about this too. The idea that when you see injustice, not the dramatic movie version, but the subtle, bureaucratic, creeping kind, you don't just shrug, you act. You gather your friends, you pool your courage, you remind the country that democratic values aren't self-maintaining, they require guardians. Who knew the guardians would show up wearing safety goggles? But they did. They are. And the movement is growing. Now, this doesn't mean every battle is won, of course. It doesn't mean the forces pushing censorship have gone away. But Stand Up for Science is proof that resistance doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That sometimes the most helpful stories come from the people who never planned to be part of the movement at all. It's proof that you don't need money or status or political clout to stand up for what's right. You just need a little bravery, a little stubbornness, and a community that believes in you. And honestly, after years of bleak political news, seeing these young researchers draw a line in the sand and say, no, you don't get to silence us, it's the kind of thing that restores a little bit of faith. Science may be under pressure, censorship may be creeping, but if this generation of researchers is any indication, the future isn't going down without a fight. And the people leading that fight, the ones defending truth, knowledge, and honest inquiry, are not jaded political operatives. They're students. They're teachers. They're kids who love microscopes. They're people who still think evidence matters. And thank God for that. Because it turns out the defenders of democracy don't always look like revolutionaries. Sometimes they just look like scientists doing what they've always done, standing up for truth and standing together. All right, folks, that brings another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left to a conclusion. I would love to hear from all of you. I'm so thankful that you take the time to download and listen to this podcast. Please reach out. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, any ideas that you might have, any comments, questions, whatever. You can use any of the social media platforms that the podcast uses. The links to all of those are on the Linktree page, and the address of the Linktree page is in the podcast description. You can, as always, reach out via email. The email address for the podcast is neighboroTleftpodcast@gmail.com. I'll be back on Friday with another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.